Hello?
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear okay? It seems like we had a bit of an audio glitch there.
Oh, all right. Are we ready to start?
We're ready to go ahead. And Christina, if you would just kick us off one more time, it seems like we had a bit of an audio glitch getting going. So go for it.
No worries. No worries at all. Well, so welcome everybody to today's webinar, Making the Case for a Marketing Investment. My name is Christina Gaughry-Campbell, and I'm the Director of Strategic Communications at Independent Sector, a diverse community of nonprofits, foundations, and corporate giving programs working to ensure all people in the United States thrive. This webinar is brought to you by Independent Sector and Prosper Strategies, the leading marketing and communications consultancy for the nonprofit sector. And I'm joined here today by our moderator, Alyssa Conrardy, President of Prosper Strategies, and two special guests, Kevin Radelet and Tabitha Upshaw. Kevin is the president of the Leukemia Research Foundation, and Tabitha is the CMO of the Global Wildlife Conservation. Welcome to our guests and moderator.
Thanks so much, Christina.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for joining. I hope that you can see us and hear us okay. Sorry about that little bit of a rocky start from an audio perspective.
So many of you joined us for earlier webinars in this series. This is the 7th in a 13-part series Prosper Strategies has put together for us, focused on the concept in their nonprofit marketing manifesto, which lays out 10 commitments nonprofits can make to increase their mission impact through marketing. In December's webinar, we introduced the entire manifesto, and then each month since, we've covered another one of their commitments. So for this webinar, we're covering commitment number 6, which says we will invest properly in marketing and treat it as a core mission support, not overhead. We'll send around a recording and slides for today's session, so don't worry about taking too many notes. And since we can't wait to get started, without further ado, I'll turn it over to our moderator, Alyssa, who will help us get started and introduce everyone.
Thanks so much, Christina. And if I could ask you, Christina, just to mute yourself, seems like we're getting a little bit of feedback. Some of our attendees are noticing that. We'll work out the audio kinks as we get going here today. But we're really excited to be here with all of you. And Kevin and Tabitha, thank you so much for joining as our guests today. Before we dive in, we'd like to take just a moment to help you all orient yourselves on GoToWebinar and greet some of you on the line. So if you could locate the questions box and just type in your name, your organization name, your title, and where you're calling in from, I will go ahead and kind of give you a sense of who's on the line with us here today. And again, that's in the questions box. Welcome, everyone. We have Tara from Indiana with the Wabash Valley Community Foundation, Marketing and Communications Associate. Mary Hirschville, Executive Director with, doesn't have her organization name. Carissa with the Cybercrime Support Network. She's a marketing specialist. We have Pam from Jacksonville, Texas. Capacity Nonprofit Mentoring. She's the owner and consultant. Welcome, Lindsay from the Henry Plant Museum in Tampa, Florida, Museum Relations Manager. There you all are. We have Sarah, Rebecca, and Nadia, all development staff from the Chicago Women's Health Center. Patty in Portland with the Wetlands Conservancy. Let's see who else. Julia Fleenor, Marketing Coordinator, Director of Marketing and Communications. Seeing a lot more names come in. I know I did not get anywhere near all of you, but thank you so much for joining. And it seems like we are getting over our audio issues, so thanks for bearing with us there. So now that you've introduced yourselves, many of you on the line, we'd like to take just a moment to introduce ourselves and our organizations. As Christina mentioned, I'm Alyssa Conrardy, the president of Prosper Strategies. We're a Chicago-based marketing firm that works exclusively with nonprofits to build their brands and advance their approach to marketing and communications. And by nature, that work puts us in close contact with a lot of nonprofit marketing and communications budgets. And in our experience, this is often an area where there's a lot of room for strategy, for growth, for development. So I'm really excited to have this discussion today. And I'm particularly excited to have it with two organizations, leaders at two organizations that are really making some major moves in regards to nonprofit marketing investment. So welcome, Kevin, and welcome, Tabitha. I'd like to have the two of you introduce yourselves to the audience, beginning with you, Kevin.
Well, I'm happy to be here and appreciate the invitation. The Leukemia Research Foundation was established here in Chicago in 1946, and it was 100% volunteer-led and managed until the early 90s. We do three things. We fund worldwide medical research, we provide patient education programs on a complimentary basis, and we manage a need-based patient financial assistance program. We run on a budget of about $2.5 million a year, not to be confused with the very large Leukemia and Lymphoma Society that brings in about $300 million a year. We're completely separate and independent. But nonetheless, I suspect there's a number of smaller nonprofits on today's webinar where marketing communications planning is really important for nonprofits, for organizations our size too. You know, there's 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States, and 66% of them are considered grassroots, with budgets less than $1 million, according to GuideStar. And we're still considered small at less than 5 million, but we're larger than 2/3 of all the operating public charities. We have a great staff of only 7 that covers finance, communications, programs, annual fund, special events, and of course development. And in a nutshell, my role is the day-to-day management, direction of the growth of the organization in the various areas with tremendous board input. Tabitha?
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Alyssa. And thanks, everyone, for having me. I'm excited to share my journey, and I really hope that some of the things that I share today can help you guys in some way. As Alyssa mentioned, I'm with Global Wildlife Conservation. We are often confused with World Wildlife Fund. Like Kevin mentioned, these guys too are a much bigger organization. Because of this confusion, we are in the midst of a rebranding, but that's a topic for another day. As our name suggests, we run wildlife conservation programs all over the world. So on any given day, we're communicating our work with things like saving Javan rhinos or finding a mate for a lonely frog. I will have to say this is probably one of the funnest jobs I've had in my career. We are a mid-sized nonprofit. While we work internationally, we are based in Austin, Texas, and we've got a satellite office in DC. We've got an operating budget of about $11 million. I am the CMO. I was hired 1 year ago, and I'm the organization's first CMO. I have a team of 3. We are responsible for all marketing and communications for the organization. And my role was created because the board felt like the organization was at an inflection point where we had really found our groove from a programmatic perspective, and it was time to raise more awareness of the organization and also about the mission, which is to protect and save wildlife and promote global diversity. Another thing the board wanted to do is make sure that we diversify our donor base because we're heavily dependent on major donors, and so we're looking to really expand that in the years to come.
Well, thanks so much, Tabitha. We really appreciate it. Appreciate so much you both being here today, and thank you both lend really great perspectives, organizations of 2 very different sizes and mission areas on the kind of common challenges that we all face when it comes to marketing investment in our marketing budget. Hopefully audio is improving for everyone here. Must not be a day that tech is in our favor because I'm getting a warning from GoToWebinar as well. So if I drop out for a moment, don't worry, we'll be back, but try to keep going here and hopefully you can all see my screen advancing. Chat in and let me know if not. You should be seeing now our agenda for today's session. We'll start with an introduction to commitment number 6, and then we'll transition to a Q&A with Tabitha and Kevin based on some of the questions I prepared. And finally, we'll wrap up by taking your questions and previewing next month's webinar and some other resources. And in case my chat isn't responding due to the note that I'm getting, Kevin and Tabitha, can you see my screen advancing?
We can, yes.
Okay, very good. Well, unless I get a warning from you 2, I will continue on. And again, apologize for any technical difficulties any of you attendees are having on your side. Commitment number 6 from the manifesto is our focus for today, and it says that we will invest properly in marketing and treat it as core mission support, not overhead. And this is such an important commitment. You might be familiar with the great work that Dan Pallotta has done around the overhead myth, but what you might not remember is that a failure to make this commitment is one of the many things that Dan says is wrong with the way we all think about, or the world thinks about, charity today. So I'll play just a minute of this video and let him explain.
The second area of discrimination is advertising and marketing. So the for-profit sector spend on advertising until the last dollar no longer produces a penny of value. See our donations spent on advertising and charity. Our attitude is, well, look, if you can get the advertising donated, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm okay with that. But I don't want my donation spent on advertising. I want it as if the money invested in advertising could adequate greater sums of money to serve the needs. In the 1990s, my company created the long-distance aid-drive bicycle journey and 60-mile-long rest of the 3-day walks. And over the course of 9 years, we had 182,000 ordinary heroes participate, and they raised a total of $581 million. They raised more money more quickly for these causes than any event in history, all based on the idea that people are weary of being asked to do the least they can possibly do. People are yearning to measure the full distance of their potential on behalf of the causes that they care about deeply. But they have to be asked. We got that many people to participate by buying full-page ads in the New York Times and the Boston Globe and primetime radio and TV advertising. Do you know how many people we would have gotten if we put up flyers in the laundromat? Charitable giving has remained stuck in the U.S. at 2% of GDP ever since we started measuring it in the 1970s. That's an important fact because it tells us that in 40 years, the nonprofit sector has not been able to wrestle any market share away from the for-profit sector. And if you think about it, how could one sector possibly take market share away from another sector if it isn't really allowed to market? If we tell the consumer brands, you may advertise all the benefits of your product, but we tell charities, you cannot advertise all the good that you do, where do we think the consumer dollars are going to flow?
Okay, so I love the ideas that Dan is bringing to the table there, and it's very much in sync with, relevant to the conversation that we want to have today. If you walk away from this webinar with just one thing, make it a desire to ask that question within your organization. How can the nonprofit sector be expected to gain market share if it's not allowed to market? And the question is, it's a great question because the answer is it just can't. You need to invest in nonprofit marketing and advertising and communications, and you need to start today if you hope to achieve real growth for your nonprofit and your mission. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how to make the case for an investment in marketing and communications at your nonprofit. And making the case for marketing investment requires 3 main things that I'd like to highlight for you today before we get deeper into the discussion with Kevin and Tabitha. Requires a certain type of mindset across your organization. It requires an effective marketing budget, and it requires a true deep commitment to measurement and optimization. So I'd like to break each of these down just for a few moments here. Making the case for marketing investment begins with building the mindset that marketing matters and that a marketing investment is mission critical. Typically, this mindset starts in one of 2 places, at least as we've experienced it in our work with the sector. It either starts with a CEO or an executive director or another leader who believes in the power of marketing and champions that belief across the rest of the team, board, donors, funders, or in some cases, it begins with someone in a marketing communications role who might have ended up doing that kind of work within the organization, but the organization around them or the funders and supporters of the organization don't really believe in or understand it. Either way, those 2 parties really need to work together to spread a belief in the importance of investing in marketing through the organization's culture all the way up to the board. And just as important as an internal belief in the importance of marketing investment is an external one. So organizations that make this commitment effectively are those that also help their donors and funders understand the importance of a marketing investment and understand that funding this sort of investment is truly just as valuable as funding many other aspects of the organization's work. So once you started to make headway in building that mindset that marketing matters, which is really what our entire series of webinars here is devoted to helping with, the next requirement when it comes to making the case for marketing investment is that you create and manage an effective marketing budget. As you know, if you've read our guide to adaptive results-oriented budgeting, which we've shared a link to in the chat box in the webinar tool, and we'll also send out in today's follow-up email, there are three basic types of nonprofit marketing budgets. The first is a task-based budget, meaning that you sort of have a laundry list of the things that you might want to do in the year ahead from a marketing perspective, or maybe you even have a marketing plan, and you set your budget up based on what those things cost. This isn't really an effective way to budget because it's not grounded in any sort of benchmarks or results, but it is something that a lot of organizations do, and it's a starting point to build a marketing budget. We won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but know that if you have a task-based marketing budget, it's better than not having one at all. The second type of budget is a percentage of revenue budget. This is common as well, and it's a slightly better way to budget because it focuses on setting your budget up as a percentage of your organization's total revenue. And according to data from Nonprofit Marketing Guide, most nonprofits aim for between 7 and 12% of revenue, excluding staff salaries. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. And then the third type of budget is what we call an adaptive results-oriented budget, which we really feel is the gold standard. This is where you set up a budget based on your assumptions about the return on investment of different marketing tactics and then adapt based on the results that you're seeing. We'll come back to that gold standard in a moment too. So let's talk first about the percentage of revenue budget. If that's an approach you're going to take, the best way to figure out what yours should be is through benchmarking against other organizations and data about where they're spending. I mentioned that according to data from Nonprofit Marketing Guide, most organizations shoot for between 7 and 12% of their revenue devoted to marketing. But what you're seeing on your screen now is a graph that will help you kind of understand the distribution of marketing communications budgets across nonprofits of different revenue sizes. This can be a helpful way to sort of get a general sense of where you could or should land from a marketing budget perspective. This data doesn't include staff budgets, though, which should make up a significant portion of your marketing budget. So to get a handle on what you should be spending there, you can look at data like this about the number of full-time employees on the communications team as a function of your organization's revenue. And you can also see here some data from Nonprofit Marketing Guide if you're looking at bringing staff budgets into your overall marketing budget on things like budget for roles like communications directors and coordinators. This might be helpful. In my opinion, at least based on the work we're doing here in the Chicago market, these numbers might be a little bit low. But if you're building this percentage of revenue budget, you'll of course want to take staff salaries into account. I'm just going to pause here for a second. Can I just ask everyone on the line, including our presenters, just go ahead and mute yourselves. I am getting a little bit of feedback again here and some background noises. So our presenters will have you unmute in a moment. Hopefully that'll help. Okay, so as I mentioned, percentage of revenue budget is not the gold standard. An adaptive results-oriented one is. And developing that budget is far more time to cover in the detail that it really deserves than we have today. But I'll give you a brief overview here of the 11 steps that go into it. And if you want to go deeper, I've linked our 11-step guide here to building an adaptive results-oriented budget. This is also in the chat, and we'll send it around following today's webinar. Okay, so 11 steps, it's a lot, like I said, more depth in the guide, but the first step in building this gold standard adaptive results-oriented budget is that marketing and communications leaders really need to be involved. They need to be invited to participate in organization-wide strategic planning, since marketing plans and therefore marketing budgets should flow from strategic plans. So in an ideal world, in that session, organization will agree on a specific set of measurable, time-based organizational goals and objectives that align with its strategic plan. The leadership team will then decide which of those goals marketing will be responsible for and which ones marketing will contribute to. Next, as you're looking at this 11-step plan for building this sort of budget, marketing should gather data and conduct research to determine which tactics and initiatives will be necessary to achieve the goals that they set and develop a marketing plan around them. And then that's the point in this 11-step process where we really get into the budgeting part of this. Next step, as we see it, is that marketing should develop estimates of the investment needed for each tactic or initiative to achieve the goal. And then this is where the work starts to get really interesting, moving on to step 6. So in this next step, the marketing team should ideally use past performance and outside data, like some of what we were looking at a minute ago, to determine the expected return on each marketing and communications investment, or the ROI. And that means for each dollar spent on a tactic or initiative, what can the organization expect to get back? It's also important here to ask, how does that outcome advance our organization's goals? So once you have some rough idea of ROI projections, what you can expect as a return from different marketing investments in place, your marketing team can then optimize its budget and aim to kind of maximize that return on investment. As you can see, okay, we think this tactic might drive more than this one. Acknowledging, that these are guesses, somewhat guesses, hopefully educated guesses about ROI and what you can expect certain marketing tactics to return for your organization. Once you have that done, you have these projections in place, you're starting to kind of optimize how you're going to spend on marketing and what you're budgeting accordingly. You're getting close to having an adaptive, results-oriented budget in place. Next step is that the marketing team should add its budget to the overall organization budget and then further optimize kind of in the lens of that budget for the results that are going to be needed to drive goals. And that's then when marketing execution with this new budget in place can begin. And start executing against your budget and tracking your results. Once things are humming, marketing team will want to do the very best, which is not easy, to track the expected versus actual return on each marketing investment on an ongoing basis and sort of make adjustments to its activities accordingly. You should ask yourself questions within your marketing team or others who have responsibility over marketing and communications about what's driving the greatest financial return, how you can do more of those things and less of the things that aren't working, and just continue to assess based on the results you're seeing. If you're confused about that, don't worry. We break it down further in the guide that we linked in on our blog. And finally, last but not least, the marketing team should maintain what we call adaptive rolling forecasts for what they need to spend on different marketing tactics based on the timely information you're getting about what's actually driving results from a marketing perspective. And then you want to continue to adapt your marketing plan and your budget as your overall strategy evolves, as you're getting data back on what's working, what spends are making sense. So this might all sound sort of complicated, and it is. That's why we call this approach the gold standard. But the reason to try to work toward it is that an adaptive, results-oriented budget is totally accountable. If you can get this down, and it takes time, it takes effort, you'll get to a place where every dollar spent on marketing, communications, and fundraising has really a meaningful return for your organization's goals. And budgets are able to be constantly optimized so that the tactics and initiatives with the highest returns really can take priority in the way you're spending. When this happens, when this gold standard is achieved, again, takes time, it really, I think, allows marketing to occupy this higher level role within an organization where it's really a growth driver. That's the role that I want to see marketing in the nonprofit sector, that I think a lot of us do, but we know that it's a struggle, and this is one of the many ways I think we'll get there. So moving on to the third and final requirement, even if you're not taking each of those 11 sort of complicated steps that I just went over to build an adaptive and results-oriented budget, measurement and optimization are still important requirements if you want to make the case for a marketing investment at your nonprofit. Tracking the direct ROI of each marketing tactic, like we suggest in the 11 steps, might not always be possible, but it should always be possible in some way to measure the results of your marketing efforts and see how those results correlate with budget. and then optimize what you're spending accordingly. So this is a case where you might sort of have some correlation between we're spending in these areas, we're seeing more results, versus a causation. We spent here, this tactic directly drove results because of that spend. So when it comes to measurement and optimization, we always suggest developing a dashboard like this one. Noreen, our client who we worked with on this dashboard, I think might be on the line with us today, so this will look familiar to her. This is a dashboard for the McCormick Foundation. And they were not necessarily following every step in the 11-step process to adaptive results-oriented budgeting, but what they were doing here is making sure to track their spend and their direct results of that spend in real time so that they could see a correlation between what they were spending and the results they were getting back. If you're doing that, you want to make sure that you're looking at it frequently, that you're reporting on results on the correlation between spend and marketing results internally and in some cases externally frequently so that you can make the case for greater marketing investment going forward. So we just covered a lot of information really quickly. So to recap, there are 3 requirements for making the case for a marketing investment. First, there's mindset. You need to get everyone on the same page, believing that marketing matters. Second, there's the marketing budget. You can approach setting it in a variety of different ways. It doesn't have to be as complex as that adaptive results-oriented budget, but you definitely need to have some sort of formal budget to make the case for marketing investment. And finally, there's measurement and optimization. You need to track marketing results and their correlation with marketing investment to make the case for bigger investments in the future. So all of that is much easier to understand in practice, of course, than it is in theory, like most things. So now I'd like to transition to a set of questions that I've prepared for Tabitha and Kevin. If you want to unmute yourselves, today's guests. Both of them are doing some really interesting things to make the case for marketing investment at their organizations, and each present pretty different perspectives since Tabitha's organization is working with about an $11 million total budget, and Kevin's is significantly smaller with about a $2.5 million overall budget. So hopefully they kind of span the spectrum of sizes of organizations on the line and can provide those diverse perspectives. At the same time, I think they're also a voice for the fact that these challenges are common across organizations of all sizes in many cases. So let's turn to them with our first question. Each of you have been on a journey, Kevin and Tabitha, it seems to me, in my work with you over the last year or so, with the way you're positioning the importance of marketing investment at your organizations. Can you take us through that journey? Just kind of take us back in time, what it's looked like. Tabitha, let's start with you.
Okay, great. Well, since we don't have a couple of hours and some wine, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. So just to kind of set the stage, before I was hired, they didn't have a formal marketing budget. So that's where I started. The comms lead at the time had to ask for everything ad hoc, and the investment was pretty nascent. And also, just to set some background, I love my CEO, but he wants everything to be free. I think the video kind of made me laugh, right? Like, oh, everybody donate everything to us, which we all know that's not realistic. We do get some in kind, and we absolutely work with that, but we do need to have an investment. And I get this. I get that we do want as many dollars as possible to go to programs. And so I took this job knowing that not only would I have to build the business case for a marketing budget or build out a marketing budget, I would absolutely have to build the case for marketing. I knew this wouldn't happen overnight, as much as I really wanted to. So, I mean, I'm really kind of right in the middle of a multi-year journey to build trust. And I think the important thing here is you're not going to hand over, whatever the case may be for your organization, be it thousands, hundred thousands, or millions of dollars to someone if you don't trust them. So this has been building up trust with the executive team, building trust with staff, because then, staff sees, oh, marketing comes in, oh, they're taking our money. So you really have to prove that you're a good steward of the money, that you're making good decisions with the money, and that you're showing that there is a return on investment with the money, and that the money is going to achieve a broader return on investment. And so I'll talk about this in some of the following questions, but it's really about testing and learning and making some investments and then seeing how well or not well they work and measuring that ROI and then reporting that back to the organization to build that trust. So that's kind of where we are right now, and I'll give you guys some more details through some of Alyssa's future questions.
Yeah, we'll definitely get in a bit deeper. Thank you, Tabitha. That's really great. And Kevin, how about you? Take us through your journey. I know it's a little bit different.
Well, I think it's important in your last slide where you had the three requirements recapped. We're still at the first one, which is setting that mindset requirement. And that starts with the board, the staff, our volunteers. It's really a different mindset for the organization. I would want to quickly interject here for our listeners to Google that TED Talks piece by Dan Pelota. We just saw a little piece of it and the audio wasn't great, but it's about 22 minutes and it's really, really it's one of those things that makes you go, huh, and really think. And that's something you can share with your staff and board as well as you're getting started on this. As far as our journey, it's really not just been in the last year. It's a 73-year history of a journey. And there was no paid staff in our organization until the early 1990s, and no real business plan. It was totally fueled by emotion. We have volunteer-led groups, which we call chapters, that raise funds through events. And when I started 15 years ago, they raised about 77% of the revenue for the organization. But that we realize is really no way to sustain or build any kind of long-term stability. So over the years, we've diversified our revenue. We've become more active in corporate sponsorship, foundation grants, building individual giving programs like direct mail, planned giving, major gifts. And the volunteer revenue that I spoke of is now only about 35% of our total revenue. And at the same time, we had very little in terms of reserves 15 years ago. But we've built that up little by little over the past years, and we now have about $2.5 million in reserves, which is equal to about 1 year of our operating. So there's been some dramatic culture change in our journey, and the stability developed in the organization has just come really just recently over the past decade. So the maturation process might not have been as fast as we prefer, but we've now reached the point where we can reinvest in ourselves and build a little bit. And I think that's the marketing investment that we realize that we need to do to continue to really sustain our growth. It's become a real priority for us in the past year, and we're looking forward to really implementing some of the plans that we have in place.
That's great. Thanks, Kevin. And yeah, I remember when I first started to talk with Kevin about some of the things that his organization was looking to do from a marketing perspective, I asked about their strategic plan, and he said, marketing is our strategic plan. So I think that really speaks to how much of a priority you put on marketing and communications at the organization going forward to achieve your growth goals. And to Kevin's note as well about the Dan Pelota talk, I agree, watch the whole thing. We'll make sure we get you the link to that in the email that we send following today's webinar. Okay, so Kevin, can you speak a little bit more for us here to what motivated, you got into this a bit, but what motivated this decision to really go into marketing so full force more recently? And what did conversations about that look like with your staff, with your board as you made that decision?
Well, I think there's probably a lot of, like I said earlier, a lot of nonprofit organizations on this call today that are our size, 2.5 million or smaller. And the first thing we had to do, as I said earlier, is to get to the point where we're financially stable and able to properly fund our mission first and foremost. Of course, you want to do that. That's why we're in business. But now we want to take that next step in our growth. And while our focus for the first 60 years was leukemia, we expanded to fund all blood cancers, leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma, at the recommendation of our medical advisory board. The logic being that while a project might be centered on leukemia, it might very well lead to discovery in lymphoma treatments or other cancers. So We did make a change in our logo and our URL about 5 years ago, but we didn't change the name because we had such a footprint here in Chicago and such a great reputation. But the examination of a major rebrand for the name change is under scrutiny right now, which of course would be no small feat. So while the name will change, what we're doing will not. We do research, financial assistance, and patient support programs. But the first motivation was, as I said here, it's a slight expansion of our funding priorities from just leukemia to all blood cancers and be able to market and communicate that. A second motivation to invest in marketing was our communications needs. How are we telling our story? How can we increase our awareness, better reach our target audience, build donor loyalty? How are we communicating, and where are we with communications across all channels, including the website, social media, and of course at our events? And in this day and age, communication really needs to be consistent and efficient when you consider all the channels that the people are getting their information from. It's information overload in the world today. With limited staff and resources, we found that our board, our staff, our volunteers, our supporters were telling our story, but in different ways. It was very, very fragmented. So our motivation came from changing, expanding our services past leukemia, but also the need to really, really batten down the hatch on what we're saying and make sure that we're all on the same page with an efficient but yet a comprehensive message for us all to move forward.
That's great. I'm sure that sounds familiar to many of you on the line. This is sort of a journey that we've talked with a lot of organizations about going through lately. Similar challenges seem to be coming up left and right in the sector. Tabitha, turning to you for a moment, tell us a little bit about, you're beginning your second year, I believe, at Global Wildlife Conservation. How and why has your marketing budget evolved in that time that you've been with the organization? Would love to hear about that.
Yeah, so yep, we're in second year, and as I mentioned before coming into it, marketing didn't have a budget, and so our budget is in, our fiscal year starts in July, so I started last May. So one of the first things I had to do when I joined GWC was to create a marketing budget. So at that time, we didn't have goals. We didn't have a marketing strategy. So really the budget request was based on past experience and, you know, the basic things that I knew that we would need. Plus I took input from my team. So I knew we would need creative services support, you know, designers, writers. I knew we would need a website because our website needed to be in a much better place. I knew we were going to do the rebrand. So there were just kind of some basic things that I needed. And throughout the year, I was able to build a case for some incremental funding, like a digital asset management system and things like that. And so last year's budget was roughly 4% of revenue. And so this year it's changed quite a bit. Most importantly, it's a much more strategic budget. We now have our goals. We've got our marketing strategy. Our marketing strategy is based on leveraging our strengths. So we did a SWOT analysis to figure out what our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats were. So one of the examples of this is that we have quite a list of celebrity influencers that want to work with us. And so, well, gosh, this is a strength. So we need to have people in place that can execute an influencer relations strategy. We need to have budget for this. And so now this year, all of our marketing expenses are in service of one or more of our marketing goals. So this is essentially a goal-based budgeting. So it's very similar to the adaptive budget that Alyssa talked about. And so we've also adapted in the sense of, you know, last year we had to carve out quite a bit of the budget for the website just to build up. But this year, you know, we've got the website, and so now we've got that on maintenance mode. So we're able to take some of the investment on the website and move that to other things. This year, I am asking for roughly a 20% increase over last year. We're still in the budget process, so I don't know if I'm going to get it. This is what I'm making the case for, but this year I'm asking for 6% of revenue. So I think last year would be characterized as just pretty tactical, and this year it's strategic and goal-based.
Right. That's great. And I love how Tabitha's budget is an example of one that really can be characterized as a sort of adaptive, results-oriented budget, but maybe she didn't necessarily have to go through all of the steps that I outlined as I went over that 11-step process. It's more about leveraging strengths, seeing what's working, and making adjustments accordingly. All right, great. So I have a question for both of you next. How have your overall goals at your organizations or your strategic plans impacted the way that you think about your marketing budget and marketing investment today? And Kevin, let's start with you here.
Well, our strategic plan is pretty simple. We want growth. We want to acquire new donors, properly steward existing donors. We need to reach all ages, including patients, our researchers, all different genders and ethnicities. All this is important to our overall plan because blood cancers can touch anybody at any time. And our organization has rapidly matured over the past 15, 20 years from a grassroots volunteer-driven organization to really an internationally recognized leader in blood cancer research. And we've improved from a 1-star charity to a Charity Navigator 4-star in 3 of the past 5 years, and that's been huge for us. So strategically, we've made ourselves well to start with and financially stable, but now we want to continue to grow and really impact the road to a cure and fuel and better serve our mission. And we need to improve our brand development, our marketing and PR, our social media, website design and development, media relations, and all of that type of thing. And again, in order to do that, you need to invest. And our board, which was restructured a few years ago, has been educated the whole way to the need and has really endorsed it. So our budgeting has included specific expenditures that have been authorized by the board each year. But I think it's really important to note, again, for organizations our size or smaller, that we have an idea of where we want to go, but an organization our size can't do it all at once. So it's been small steps in budgeting along the way over the past few years that are now gaining momentum and getting larger and have been included in the annual budget each year.
Yeah, incremental growth and change there. Better than no growth, right? And I think having that vision in mind and making small steps in the right direction is really the way to go for most smaller organizations. How about you, Tabitha?
So we don't have a formal strategic plan, but we do kind of have a common idea where we're all going, which is great. So to Kevin's point, we know we want to diversify our donor base while keeping loyalty of those we have, those donors that we have, and then also spread awareness and generate awareness not only of our organization but also of just the importance of biodiversity, which is critically important for the survival of the human race, quite frankly. Yeah, so that's really guided this thought of investing in marketing and then making the investments that we have. So much very similar to Kevin.
For sure, for sure. Has it been difficult for you without a true strategic plan to chart the course for some of these things? Do you feel like that would have made your job easier? Or is it just a matter of you have the same information that would be in a strategic plan, but it's just not formally in one, so you're in an okay spot?
Yeah, I mean, would it ideally, yes, I would love to have a strategic plan, because if I knew like by how much we wanted to grow, I could work back.
Right.
Yeah, I'm okay with ambiguity too, so I'll make it work.
You're making it work, exactly. You're making it work right now, presently. Okay, great. So how do you decide then how much is appropriate to invest in marketing? And Tabitha, let's start with you here.
Oh, okay, yeah. So this one is a tough one for sure. So walk you guys through what I considered. So the first thing is, what are the board's expectations? Because they were, we'll talk about this in a minute, but they were really the impetus for investing in marketing in a bigger way. There was this idea of a household name being thrown around, which coming from Dell and a consumer organization, that's hundreds of millions of dollars. So I don't know if we're quite there. But anyway, the net of that is there are big expectations. So then I looked at what are other organizations like us spending. And so that's when I reached out to Alyssa, because I wanted to understand really in the nonprofit world, what should I expect? And then I also benchmarked with a few small consumer brands that are, we've got lots of them popping up in Austin, since we have very similar org structures and goals. And so where all of this netted out was that if I look at about a 6% revenue as a reasonable target or kind of sanity check, that's how I got to where we are today.
Great. Okay, helpful. I like that thinking, sort of working backward. Kevin, you're in a different role, you're in a different financial situation. How did you go about deciding how much you could or should spend?
Well, it's, funding the mission is and always will be our top priority. When you start a new fiscal year, you have to be 100% sure that the programs are fully funded to the best of your ability. That's why people are supporting you. As I said earlier, we've been setting aside and investing a little bit each year in marketing, and for us, that's anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 a year. We probably fall into that category from your earlier slide, where we find money when needed, quote unquote, to move forward. Right. We've been very, very conservative. In terms of what's appropriate, our plan is still under development. So when we adopt it and are ready to implement it, we're going to get knee deep into the budgeting. But your earlier budget example that allocates 22% to content marketing, and 18% to advertising and 10% to social media is certainly a good guide. And we know the budget is a forecast. It's really not ever cut in stone. But as I said, we've been very conservative with our approach. And at the same time, we look back at that marketing investment each year and make sure a suitable return on investment is realized. We're not just going to continue to keep pouring money into something unless we're seeing some results and tangible evidence that we're moving forward.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Even with smaller, more incremental changes, you need to be seeing that return, and you should be, especially if you're really investing in marketing and communications for the first time. You should be able to see shifts even with smaller, more incremental changes.
Right.
Okay. Thanks. And Kevin, staying with you for a minute, can you take us through more specifically some of the items that Leukemia Research Foundation has chosen to invest in from a marketing perspective over the last year, and sort of how you made those choices or priorities?
Well, we realized we need to get all of our messaging straightened around to be consistent. Our goal is, as I said, to secure and grow our financial resources and better serve the mission. And we chose to engage a firm that could look at our organization from the outside perspective and analyze what's good and what can be improved. Our goal is to establish effective brand messaging, develop and launch a results-driven communications and marketing program, drive donors to take action and become loyal supporters, and then amplify the impact of the organization and foster growth. So this year we invested in 3 key areas. The first thing we did was to conduct a full discovery and audit, assessing our landscape and stakeholder opinions, including phone calls, surveys, thorough reviews of our collateral materials and platforms, including our website, social media, direct mail, brochures, etc. The second step that we took is, based on those findings from the discovery, to build a brand strategy and develop that with fresh messaging standards and identifying areas where we could be even better. And this step also included the creation of a succinct case for support. And then the third thing that we did this year is develop a marketing strategy that includes a long-term integrated marketing and public relations plan focused on effectively leveraging marketing to advance our goals in alignment with our available resources. And of course, that's really key, as I've been touching on. It's got to be in alignment with your available resources. But we believe this will give us a solid basis for moving forward when we actually implement. And then, of course, we'll visit and revisit where we are in the future and continue to improve each year.
Right. That's great. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I think the last piece about the marketing budget in alignment with your financial resources and the marketing plan in alignment with your financial resources is so critical. There's so many things you could choose to invest in as one-offs, but making any investment without having that kind of foundational messaging and strategy in place is a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. I think you really can lose sight of the bigger picture and make investments that might seem like a good idea in the moment or might be driven by a particular board member who has a louder voice on your board. But when it really comes back to, at the end of the year, looking at those investments and saying, did these drive our goals forward? Are these driving us closer to our mission? In my opinion, unless you're working from sort of that central marketing plan that's in alignment with your financial resources, it's hard to know. So I think that stuff is critically important. Okay, so Tabitha, I want to dig into your budget itself, the actual budget document, a little bit deeper. Your budget is really detailed and comprehensive. I got a chance to work with Tabitha on her budget a month or two ago, and I was very impressed with the way she set it up. So Tabitha, can you take us through how you set up the different categories and how you detail the budget? Would also like to see kind of your budgeting scenarios, if you don't mind talking us through that on the next page here.
Yeah, so just to first talk about, so the general approach was this good, better, best approach. So I started with what I called the status quo. This is kind of the core budget. And so this is my explanation around this was nothing changes if nothing changes. And then we have an improved budget scenario, which is some incremental investment over and above status quo, and then an industry standard. And so that was kind of my general approach. And then at the bottom of this, I have my prediction of how long it will take for marketing to start to pay itself back. And then here, this is where you can go to the next page. Yes.
Okay. Yep. There we are.
Yeah. So here are some of the budget, or excuse me, some of the categories. So the critical thing here is to explain this that non-marketers could understand. This actually doesn't look like previous budgets I've done, because I've been able to, we've grouped categories like put all agencies in a line item and all production costs in a line item, or, in a bucket, and then all contractors and paid media in their own buckets. But I needed a way to communicate this in a more tangible way. So I went with things like things that people understood, like you understand websites, you understand, marketing technology, the tech that we need, inbound. I'm still explaining inbound marketing.
Right.
And then what's not on here is, social media and things like that. And so sometimes I think it's helpful to look at this on a per month basis versus looking at it on an annual basis, because sometimes when you see the annual numbers, you're like, what? Why? When you're looking at it per month, you're like, oh, okay, well, this looks a little bit more palatable. So that was my approach.
Especially with things like marketing technology, where often you're paying monthly, or like contractors or agencies where their fee structure is monthly, that breakdown is in alignment with how you're actually making the spend. And I think it's, as someone who might have to digest this budget, your CEO or someone else, I think it's helpful to see monthly spend to get a realistic sense of how the money is flowing out, and also to know that we have the opportunity here throughout the year to make adjustments to some of these things. This isn't just a one and done across every single line item.
Absolutely, yeah. And I try to avoid as much as I can long-term contracts. We needed to do that with our website agency last year because we had a growth-driven design approach for our website. But normally I like to do minimum 3 months, because I think with any agency or partner that you're working with, you need to, it takes a few months to get the relationship going. Right. But yeah, kind of adapting and, keep with what's working and, move away from what's not. So.
Right. Absolutely. Well, yeah. Tabitha's budget is extremely impressive. You're only seeing small glimpses of it here. This approach is one that I think any of you could take and model against, even if your budget is much smaller, just in terms of the organization and thought that went into how the information is presented.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Good work, Tabitha. Inspiring example for all of us marketing budgeters here on what is probably not everyone's favorite task. You did a good job and really approached it strategically, and there's a bit of creativity in there too, I think. Has to be.
This is something I actually enjoy, so I don't know what that says about me, but I like
You're
it.
a rare breed, I think. Okay, well, Kevin, transitioning back to you for a moment. I know you've been with your organization for quite a while. How has your history with Leukemia Research Foundation impacted the way that you think about making this marketing investment that you're making today?
Well, I've been here for 15 years, and we had to get healthy financially first. And we have a small staff of 7, and it's a great group. But first and foremost, we had to get healthy, and we've done that. As I shared, we're proud to have earned that 4-star rating from Charity Navigator. We do good work, and we are what we are. We realized what we are, and we're darn proud of it. We don't try to be something that we're not. And you have to be mindful of our long 73-year history and culture, and many of the volunteers not many, but some of the volunteers who built the organization are still very active in what we do. We don't bite off more than we can effectively do, and we don't adopt new programs just for the sake of adding a new program. We expand our services only when there's a genuine need identified where such resources might not be available elsewhere to patients and to researchers. And we're fine-tuning, how we communicate our great services that we provide, and that's important that we continually strive to improve on them. So having a clear path in marketing communications is going to be very key to us moving forward.
Right. So do you feel like the early days of just needing to stabilize financially have made you more cautious, but also more excited about the potential for growth? Is that sort of the net effect of those early days?
Well, no question about it, but you can't do anything unless you're solid and stable. And as much as we wanted to do 10 years ago, we just weren't ready to do it. Little things that mean so much, like cleaning up our database and making sure that's functioning for us as opposed to against us. We've made great strides there. So just structurally getting our act together, quite frankly, and doing the mandatory things before we can really move forward and consider marketing and communications a mandatory thing as well.
Yep, totally. I'm sure that sounds real familiar to a lot of folks on the line today.
Right.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about this in both the kind of initial teaching section that I presented, and then Kevin, as you started talking about, being a good steward of your budget. But I'd like to hear from you first, Tabitha, on this one, and then Kevin will transition back to you. What are you doing right now, Tabitha, to assess the return on your marketing investment?
So, well, we are very much in building infrastructure to be able to report on the return on investment. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So the things we're doing, putting systems in place so they can actually talk to each other. So, for example, we weren't capturing website emails, subscribers, and then we definitely, our MailChimp wasn't talking to our website. We didn't have the ability to track website donations. There's not any marketing automation. We don't have a donor database. So we're just, as Kevin was saying, we're still trying to execute on just some of these really foundational things. We're making great progress in this way, but we're definitely measuring and reporting out on what we can. So we do a monthly deep dive with my team. And so we do look into the metrics that we are able to get, like we're able to get social, we've got Meltwater on the PR side. So we're able to look at that and figure out, okay, what's working, what are the metrics, what didn't work, why that didn't work, and then what could we be doing differently. So we're still very much building it as we go, but I would say we are able to make tweaks along the way, particularly in social where we've got the most robust metrics available.
Sure, so much data. Yeah, that's good, and hopefully reassuring to some of you on the line that it's not just the fact that your organization is small, maybe for those of you who are with smaller organizations on our webinar today, that is causing the lack of ability to measure the return on your marketing investment. It's something that organizations of all sizes are working on right now. And I think we have to pause and remember sometimes that all of this data that we now have access to, we didn't have 5 to 10 years ago. It's all relatively new, and we're getting new inputs all the time, and our ability to measure things, yes, is increasing exponentially, but we're still at the very beginning of even having access to all of this information. And Kevin, how about you? Anything to add to that? Anything that you're doing at LRF to manage or assess the return on your marketing investments?
Well, much of the ROIs can be measured in direct comparison to the needs and opportunities that we outlined in our initial request for proposal that we distributed to 5 or 6 different firms for their help. A lot of time was spent internally over the years identifying our needs and our shortcomings, and these were clearly outlined as bullet points in our proposal. We're still working to determine more quantifiable goals and ways to measure ROI, actual metrics that can be measured over time. We want to measure an increase in donors, an increase in giving amounts, reach our social media messaging, involvement as volunteers at our events. All this can be measured. You can measure traffic on your website, the level of engagement on your website and social media. And of course, you can also measure any kind of media attention that you get. So all these things will be on the checklist. And just as importantly, as Tabitha said, we want to monitor our weaknesses too, so that we're well aware of the things that we can improve on, and also what things we should be avoiding.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Don't only focus on the strengths, look at where are we wasting money? Where are we wasting time and effort? Where can we optimize?
Right.
Okay, well, good. I'm at my last question for you all, and then I'm seeing a lot of great questions come in from the audience. So after this one, we'll transition over to them. But beginning with you, Tabitha, what's the number one piece of advice you give to today's attendees about their approach to making the case for marketing investment?
Well, Alyssa, I'm going to reinforce what you said at the beginning, which is we absolutely have to think about marketing as a growth driver for the organization and not as a cost center, as Kevin talked about. This is absolutely, it's a mind shift. It's a mindset shift for a lot of folks. And so if you do marketing well, it will absolutely pay for itself.
Yes, I love it. Snaps to that over here. How about you, Kevin? What's your number one piece of advice? Oh, I hope we didn't lose Kevin. Kevin, are you still with us?
I'm sorry. No, I missed you there for a second.
No problem.
As far as any kind of advice I could share, we all have, if you will, customers. And, marketing consists of different strategies and tactics to identify and create and maintain satisfying relationship with our donors, our members, our volunteers, clients, all of our stakeholders. And to me, in terms of advice that I would share, at the heart of all this is positioning. Marketing is known to pull the audience from where it is to the nonprofit and then take some type of action, whereas communication pushes it out. And I think positioning is really the linchpin between the two. It flows from the mission and guides us into the future and works to build the organization's reputation with the audiences. And positioning is strategic too. There's few things more valuable than a nonprofit's reputation. And in this, I guess, changing landscape where nonprofits must be nimble and quick, proper positioning in a competitive nonprofit world takes on an even more importance. So my advice would be to keep that concept of positioning top of mind. A second real quick bit of advice that we really didn't touch on is that you really need to garner your board's involvement and buy-in right from the start. Know who you are. Don't try all the bells and whistles. Don't try to be something that you're not. But you got to have 100% buy-in from the board, or you're going to have a long road.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Very well said. And I think that your response to that last question transitions really well into what I had picked out as our first question from the audience. And this comes from Kathy. And Kathy says, have either of you faced a situation where you had someone on your leadership team or on your board who was a detractor and really didn't believe that you should invest in marketing and communications? And how did you handle that detractor? So either of you can answer that if you've had experiences with that.
Well, I can chime in real quick and just say that we've done a really good job, as I said, taking little steps and informing and sharing information with the board. And when it's like a detractor in any area. If you find out what the issues are, what the hurdles are that they need to overcome, you can address them. Again, I think you'll gain a lot by watching that Dan Pelota video on TED Talks, but it goes back also to the strategic plan for the organization. And if they want to grow, they have to define exactly what that means to them. So if they're detracting from marketing and communications, where do they want to invest to ensure that growth? So you got to be obviously tactful, but it takes time, and you really need to build a team of other people that can convince that detractor.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I would add to that, I think there's possibly a misalignment with that board member or person on the leadership team in general if they feel that this sort of investment is not going to move your goals forward. There might be a misalignment in how they understand your goals and the challenges that you're up against that goes beyond just marketing and communications.
Yeah.
Tabitha, anything else to add there?
Yeah, so I would say, there's definitely detraction points. I don't think any one person is, I would consider a detractor, but there are definitely detracting points. I would say, the idea of it should be given to us and it should come for free comes up quite often. So I feel like I'm having to deal with that quite a bit. And then, what kind of value will this bring? So I think those the two questions that I have to address most often.
Yeah, and probably common ones for other folks on the line today. Those come up a lot in our work as well. Okay. Well, this is a question from Jessie that I wanted to touch on earlier in our conversation, and we just didn't quite dig into it enough. So thanks, Jessie, for asking this. She asked, she says, you showed some figures about staff budget on previous slides. How do Tabitha and Kevin think about their staff budgets for marketing and communications as it relates to their overall budget?
So I look at staff budgets as being total into my. I look at it holistically. So when I consider 6% of revenue, that's the salaried employees, and then the support staff. So I look at it in terms of fixed, which are the employees, and then variable. Variable could be support staff like agencies, contractors, freelancers. So that's how I have it broken up. Right now, I would say. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, did you make a deliberate decision, or is this sort of a function of what you inherited to keep your team relatively small and have a fairly large budget for contractors and agencies?
Yeah, I would say part of it has to do just with the ethos of the organization. Our business model is to partner with other organizations, so we don't have a lot of staff. We only actually have 27 staff. Our goal is to work with people in country. And so if I were to build up a big staff, then that would start to dwarf our regular staff. So we also take a partnership model. Yeah.
That makes total sense. And Kevin, I know your situation is a little bit different. How do you think about your staff budget?
Well, like Tabitha, we don't have it broken down necessarily as a staff budget, but we have 7 employees, and with an organization that size, there's a lot of our development people are involved in programming. Our program people are included in communications. It's really truly a team effort where they're not working in silos. They have a lot of years of seniority. I think the lowest in seniority is 10 years. We do have our database guy who's only got 2 years, but the other 6 employees have been here for 10 years or longer. So they've been involved since the start, and neither the board nor I have all the answers. And as I said, we have great people that have contributed to this process throughout. And once we decide on and implement our real course of direction on the marketing and communications materials, we're going to reassess where we are and to be sure that we're properly prepared and staff for implementing the program that we adopt.
Makes total sense. That's great. Good to get both of those perspectives. And hopefully that, again, spans the spectrum of those of you on the line today who are with small, medium, large organizations. You're seeing kind of two different takes on this. So we have just a couple of minutes left. I'm going to just take one last audience question here, and I'm skimming for one that I know we can cover in the time frame. Let's see. So this one's specifically for Tabitha, and this comes from Cindy. Cindy asks Tabitha how your organization thinks about its development budget and investment in relation to the marketing investment. Are they separate budgets? Are they one and the same?
I love this question. So right now they're separate. We've got a completely separate events budget. We've got several big events over the years, so that's handled separately. And any kind of creative services that happens with those events get allocated to that budget. As far as fundraising budget, we actually only have one fundraiser, and she's primarily devoted to grant writing. We've been looking for a CDO for quite some time. So I would say marketing is actually doing some of the fundraising right now, particularly with online and digital. So we will eventually look at them. So events definitely separately, and then the CDO will have a budget at some point when we hire that person. So
really helpful. Yeah, that's great. And Cindy, to follow up on that question, I've seen organizations do this in every different way you could possibly imagine, where there's one master marketing communications development budget, and then there's broken out line items. I've seen where the marketing budget lives under the development budget. That's not my favorite approach. I've seen where they're entirely separate, and then I've also seen a situation where there's a separate marketing communications budget and development budget, but then there's also a third shared budget. So lots of different ways to approach it. I think it comes back to the question of how does your organization sort of strategically think about the difference between and the overlap between development and marketing and communications, and your budget should really reflect that strategy. So I'm happy to talk about that more. I also love that topic. So with just our last few minutes today, first off, I want to thank you both, Kevin and Tabitha, so much for being with us today. Your insights were really invaluable. And I want to thank our great audience as well, our 125 plus people on today's webinar, for your engagement, for your great questions, and for sticking with us with a few technical glitches. I hope the audio wasn't too bad, but not sure what happened with that today. We'll work to get it sorted out for next time. So thank you all very, very much. I want to leave you with a couple of resources to help you go a little bit deeper into this material and the material that we've been covering through this entire series as we close out today. First, if you were on our webinar last month, you know that we recently launched a closed private Facebook group that we hope can start to serve as a community for those of you who have been finding value in this webinar series, as well as sort of our wider world of nonprofit leaders and marketers and communicators. Called the Nonprofit Marketing Collaborative, and you can find the URL on your screen and in the chat box. We'll also send it around in today's follow-up email. Community is closed. I think that's really critically important to note with what Facebook has become today, meaning that you'll have to request to join, answer a few questions so that you belong there. And then once you're in the group, we have a strict non-promotion policy and ask that all members adhere to our shared values of respect, transparency, collaboration, contribution, and inclusion. So if those sound like things you can get behind and you want to have a safe space where you can come and share your ideas and brainstorm with fellow leaders and marketers, we'd love to have you in the group. Next up, we also have a live in-person workshop coming up in Chicago in September for those of you who are interested in working with us directly on your marketing budget as part of your overall marketing plan. The workshop September 13th, planning to work hand in hand with a small group of attendees on the marketing plans at the workshop. Budgeting is a part of that curriculum. And the workshop will include a mix of teaching sessions and interactive exercises and group brainstorming that will guide you in your marketing planning efforts. You'll hopefully walk away from the workshop with a full-fledged marketing plan in hand that you can go back to your office and add additional detail to and then begin executing. So we'd love to have any of you at this workshop if you're in Chicago or game to travel in the beautiful early fall season to our great city. Workshop includes a breakfast, lunch, and post-planning happy hour celebration, as well as complimentary copies of our essential nonprofit marketing plan template. So we have a special discount of $100 off through the end of today. It's up on the screen here using the code webinar. If you'd like to join us, just make sure you sign up with that code in the next 24 hours. Love to see you there. And if you want to go deeper than the free resource that we shared today, that essential 11-step guide to nonprofit market budgeting, we also have a paid resource that thinks about budget as part of the overall marketing plan, offering a discount code on that today as well. You can find the link on that here, and we'll send it an email. So hope you can join us on Facebook, in person in Chicago for our workshop in September, and also look forward to seeing you on our next webinar, where we will discuss taking your nonprofit leadership to the next level. That is going to be a conversation with Chloe and Caitlin from One Goal. Chloe's at their regional office here in Chicago. Caitlin's at their national office. Both work in marketing. So you can sign up directly at the link on your screen or in the chat box. Again, this will be in your email today. So lots of links coming at you. In the meantime, hope you'll all continue, as always, building toward your marketing revolution, and let me know if we can be of any help. I will leave my contact information up here on the screen, as well as my business partners, Lindsay. And thank you all again, Kevin and Tabitha, and all of our attendees for being here today. Talk to you next time.